What separated Ben Hogan from every other golfer of his era? It wasn't just his swing. It was what happened between his ears. But today we're diving deep into the mental game of one of golf's greatest legends. A man who transformed himself from an inconsistent player into a ball-striking machine through sheer mental discipline. Ben Hogan didn't just play golf. He dissected it, studied it, and mastered it from the inside out. And the principles he lived by on the course can transform your game today if you're willing to do the work. Let's get into it. Section 1. The Hogan Transformation. Here's something most golfers don't know. Ben Hogan was a terrible player early in his career. He struggled with a devastating hook that cost him tournaments and nearly ended his professional dreams. But Hogan made a decision, refused to accept mediocrity. Hogan once said that the most important shot in golf is the next one, not the one you just hit, not the one you'll hit on 18. The next one. This wasn't just a clever saying. It was his entire mental philosophy. Hogan understood something fundamental. Golf is played in the present moment, and the golfer who can stay there longest will win. Hogan carried a notebook everywhere. Ho documented every aspect of his swing, every course condition, every mental state. He approached golf like a scientist approaches an experiment, with precision, patience, and relentless focus on improvement. The lesson for us? Champions are made in the mind before they're made on the course. Section 2. Preparation over talent. Hogan had a famous saying about practice. The secret is in the dirt. He believed that every shot in competition should be a shot you've already hit 1,000 times in practice. But here's the key: it wasn't mindless repetition. Hogan practiced with intention. Every swing had a purpose. He would visualize the shot before hitting it, commit to a specific target, and execute with total concentration. Then he'd analyze the result and adjust. This is what we call deliberate practice, and it's the foundation of mental toughness. Here's a specific example from Hogan's approach. He would never aim at a flag tucked close to trouble. Instead, he aimed for the safe part of the green and let his precision do the work. This wasn't conservative golf, it was smart golf. He once described his strategy as playing to your misses. Hogan knew his tendency was a slight fade, so he aimed his shots to account for it. He hit it perfectly straight, he'd have a makeable putt. If he hit his normal fade, he'd be close. He eliminated the big number before he ever swung. Section 3. The Concentration Zone. People said Hogan had the most intimidating stare in golf. They called it the Hogan stare, but it wasn't meant to intimidate opponents. It was the visible sign of total concentration. Hogan described his mental state on the course as being inside a bubble. And outside that bubble, crowds could scream, opponents could collapse, weather could change, none of it mattered. Inside the bubble, there was only him, the ball, and the target. This level of focus didn't happen by accident. Hogan had a specific routine for building concentration. Between shots, he would release his focus, chat if necessary, observe the course. But as he approached his ball, the bubble would form. First, he'd assess the lie and conditions. Then he'd select his club. Next, he'd stand behind the ball and visualize the exact shot, the trajectory. The landing spot, the ball's behavior after landing. Finally, he'd address the ball and commit completely to the swing. No second guessing, no what-ifs. Once Hogan started his routine, he was locked in. This is critical for your mental game. Indecision kills confidence. Hogan's routine eliminated doubt because he made all his decisions before stepping up to the ball. The result? Hogan was famous for getting better when the pressure increased. He won 9 major championships, and many believe he would have won more if not for a near-fatal car accident in 1949. Section 4. Course Management. Mastery. Let's talk about how Hogan actually played the game, because his course management was as precise as his ball striking. Hogan would arrive at a tournament course days early. He'd walk every hole, noting the angles, the trouble spots, the pin positions that were sucker pins versus legitimate targets. He'd create a game plan before the tournament even started. From the tee, Hogan rarely aimed at the center of the fairway. He aimed at the spot that gave him the best angle into the green. Sometimes this meant favoring one side dramatically, even if it meant flirting with roof, because the approach from that angle was so much better. This is strategic golf, not reckless, not conservative strategic. Here's a practical example you can use. On a dogleg, most amateurs aim at the corner, trying to cut off as much distance as possible. Hogan would aim at the spot that gave him a full view of the green for his approach if it meant hitting a longer second shot. Why? Because he'd rather have 150 yards with a clear look than 120 yards from a blocked position. He played the percentages, shot by shot, round by round. Around the greens, Hogan's philosophy was even more defined. He identified what he called premium positions, areas of the green where you could realistically make birdie. If the pin was in a dangerous position, he aimed for the premium position and took his two-putt par. This sounds simple, but it requires incredible discipline. When you're standing over a shot, seeing the flag, your ego wants to go at it. Hogan's genius was suppressing that ego and playing the smart shot every single time. He famously said that golf was a game of controlling your misses. If you could eliminate the big number, the birdies would eventually come. Section 5. Pressure and adversity. Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong, because they will. Even for Ben Hogan. In the 1950 U.S. Open at Marion, just 16 months after his car accident, Hogan was tied going into the final round. His legs were heavily bandaged, and he was in constant pain. By the back nine, he could barely walk. But his mind never wavered. Hogan's approach to adversity was simple. Control what you can control. He couldn't control his physical limitations that day. He couldn't control his competitors, but he could control his focus, his routine, and his shot selection. He finished the regulation 72 holes tied, then won the 18-hole playoff the next day despite being in agony. For your mental game, this principle is gold. When you hit a bad shot, you have about 30 seconds where your brain wants to spiral, to catastrophize, to get angry, to lose confidence. Hogan would acknowledge the shot, extract any useful information, then immediately shift his focus to the next shot. Not the next hole, not the next round, the next shot. Here's a practical technique. After a bad shot, take 3 deep breaths. Acknowledge what happened. Acknowledge what happened. On the second breath, decide what you'll do differently. On the third breath, let it go and focus on your next target. This simple routine can save you multiple strokes per round. So what can we learn from Ben Hogan's mental game? First, preparation builds confidence. The work you do before the round determines how you'll perform under pressure. Second, focus on the process, not the outcome. Hogan played one shot at a time with complete commitment to each one. Third, strategy beats ego every time. Play smart golf, not hero golf. Fourth, control what you can control. You can't control the weather, the course conditions, or your opponents. But you can control your routine, your focus, and your decisions. Ben Hogan proved that golf is won in the mind. Transformed himself from a struggling pro into a legend through mental discipline, strategic thinking, and relentless preparation. The question is, are you willing to do the same? If you like this video, subscribe to Bite-Sized Golf Wisdom for more mental game insights. Just drop a comment telling me which Hogan principle you'll apply to your next round. And remember, the secret is in the dirt, but the magic is in the mind. I'll see you on the course.